So Noor, for the people in the room who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Okay. So my name is Noor. I am a journalist and speaker, and a lot of people call me an activist, and then I would just be like, no, I'm not. Just because I wear a hijab, and do a job doesn't mean I'm an activist. But I've started opening up more to that term in the sense that the way that I tell stories and the way that I report is a form of activism, because I believe that equipping people with information and knowledge across the entire spectrum of a story and getting down to that most human aspect of a story is a radical form of truth telling. And so if that is activism in your eyes, then I do that as well. And yeah, I believe in telling stories in a way that, cares about the community that you're talking about. And I have been talking on breaking barriers through storytelling and misrepresentation for almost 10 years now. And I'm 25. So yeah, I've started very young.
Yeah, so that was the crazy thing when I was sort of doing my prep for this interview. I was like, wait, she went to college when she was 16? Like, that is so crazy, first of all, but amazing.
But I also just told you why. It wasn't because I was like super smart or anything. I put on the hijab when I was 15 turning 16, and I had known that I wanted to be a journalist since I was like this high. I actually just found 2 weeks ago like home videos of me as an 8-year-old doing my news reports, and my dad like prepping me and teaching me how to sign off of a news report. So this is all I ever knew I wanted to do. And then when I put on and the reason I never wore the hijab was because I thought I would never be able to do this, because I'd never seen somebody on TV. And so if you don't see somebody who represents you in a field that you aspire to, then what makes you think it's going to be possible? So I really credit that to my parents, because they were like, you can do anything. And then I did. So yeah, and then when I put it on, my mom was like, why don't you just homeschool the rest of your high school and start college early so you can give yourself a head start, because it's going to be harder for you. And then I did.
Wow. And so you're 10 years into your career now, and sort of, in speaking to you, I just feel I've learned so much. And so you are teaching, me and old, I'm 33, but then also teaching, younger generations about what inclusivity and diversity looks like, and just misrepresentation and that sort of thing just looks like. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
I mean, a lot of why I wanted to speak to you today, though, is to just sort of drill in on why you wanted to start down this career path.
So I wanted to be a storyteller, I think, because I felt like the thing that I was good at was asking questions. And I just never left the house until now. Like, I rarely ever leave the house without a book. So I was obsessed with reading. I was obsessed with asking questions. And I realized that it came so naturally to me. Like growing up when people were really good at sports and good at art and things like that, I just had my teachers always saying, you ask really good questions. And I was like, oh, cool, that's a thing. And I remember one time when I was 12, actually maybe 11, I went into my grandmother's mosaic class at a some senior program, and I just talked to everybody there because old people are great. And then afterwards, this World War II vet stood up, and he looked at me and was like, we've been in this class together for 3 months and have never known more than each other's names, and now we all know each other's life stories. Thank you. And I was a kid, but I remember that just resonated so much with me, and I was like, maybe there's something here. And then my parents just saw that there was this thing in me and this obsession with this. So they really helped kind of propel it forward. And so I always bring it back to I think that we are all very familiar with what we want to do at a very young age, but growing up in a society that's filled with, fears and preconceived notions of where you're going to be, or what your parents think you should do, or what's going to be most comfortable to you. And so when we fall into all of that, you end up losing sight of what it was that made you truly so happy. I always say finding your purpose is combining your skill sets and your talents with the things that pain you. And so for me, when I finally was able to realize what it was that pained me, I boiled it down to violence against women and misrepresentation of marginalized communities. And so that became my mission.
Yeah. It's funny that you sort of talk about how your parents were able to give you that sort of head start and encourage you to do it. It's interesting though, because I am a Nigerian American and my parents were very much so like, if you're not going to be a doctor or a lawyer or something very traditional, you know, is this the best career path for you? But, and it goes back to having, you know, representation. No one in the media really looked like myself. We don't get to see a lot of women of color in the media doing this sort of whole journalism thing. So, you know, parents get scared sometimes.
Oh my gosh, and also, you're first gen too, right? So we're both first gen. So both of our parents were all immigrants. So we're going to have this conversation. Yeah. But I think that it's such a great point that you bring up, because I recognize like that, you know, our parents came here. And oftentimes, like, they come here because they also want to bring their families to have, like, the best chance you have. And for a lot of people, like, that, especially in our cultures, it was always, like, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're an engineer. And that's why we came to America, so you could be great at those things, you know? And I think that, like, for me, my dad is a doctor, so he came here for that. But my mom came here when she was a lot younger and ended up becoming a guidance counselor, and I credit a lot of my upbringing to that. Because she was always like, we had like an emotion ball in my house where it would be like, are you happy, are you sad? And you would catch and you would talk about your feelings, which I recognize is so rare.
What immigrant household? Like, what?
It's not an immigrant. It's totally not. But my mom also came here when she was 11. So she like identifies more with American culture than anything else. But the thing that made it different in my household, and I now as an adult am able to reflect on that, is that we were brought up more with a faith base than a culture base. So this is getting super deep, but in our culture, if you're Arab, there's a word that's called aib, which just means shameful or inappropriate. And then there's, in the religious context, haram, which is not allowed. And that's just in religion. And so my parents never used the cultural term. They were never like I remember I was in 7th grade and I would walk out of the house in these vintage pointy gold heels that I found at a thrift store and a silky pink skirt, and like did my hair crazy, and I went through like an emo phase, and my parents never said anything. And now I'm like, why didn't you say anything? My mom was like, why would I not let you express yourself? Because like there was nothing wrong with it, you know? And so I credit a lot of that to like them just kind of building us up through what my faith actually taught. And I think a lot of times in Muslim American households, cultures is the focus, and so that's what I've seen from my experience.
That's
so deep, and I don't know if you guys like that's.
I mean, we did say we were going to get a little deep.
Yeah,
we were going to spill some tea.
That's true.
So here we are. I mean,
here's the
early
tea.
in. I know. So, and you know, we know that hijab is a huge part of who you are and your storytelling. I'd love to hear just a little bit how that influences the stories that you choose to tell.
My gosh, that's such a great question, because so I mentioned earlier, like I grew up in a very small conservative white town. Like I walked into my 1st grade class and I asked the people next to me, or the girl next to me, if she was Muslim too, because she had dark brown hair and I hadn't seen anybody in my town with dark brown hair. And it was real. Like as a kid, that was something that I was so hyper aware of. So growing up, I was like, I remember I used to like pray in my class, because my mom obviously was very involved at school, and she wears hijab, and I used to pray that she would forget to wear it to school, because I just didn't want to deal with the kids asking me, you know, why does your mom wear that thing on her head? And I'd just be like, I don't know. And like there's just like this deep shame that I carried about looking different than anybody else. And so growing up, my parents never mentioned the hijab to me. They were like, it's a choice, contrary to what the media says. And so it was something that like they were just like, you're never going to do it, so whatever. And I remember recently I interviewed my mom, and I was like, how did you feel when I put it on? And she was like, and I thought she was going to be like, I was so proud of you. You know, you were finding yourself, you were doing whatever. And her answer was just like, I didn't care. She was like, I was proud of you in so many other things, but like, it didn't matter to me whether or not you wore it. You were just a good person. And I just didn't I was like, oh, that's cool. I mean, I hope she's finding herself. And she was like, to be honest, I didn't think you were even going to keep it on. And sometimes I think about it and I'm like, I didn't know if I was going to keep it on either. because I kind of put it on impulsively. I was really struggling with my identity, and I think oftentimes when you like are trying to kind of put on for yourself, you do it impulsively, because I don't think there's ever a time that's right for you to truly be your most authentic self. And so when I put it on, and I truly believe this was just a blessing, but like I got a job offer at a newspaper shortly after, and I remember thinking like, okay, maybe I can do this. Maybe if I work really, really hard, I can do this. And back to your question, I genuinely feel like, in a reflective sense, that because I put the hijab on, one, it propelled me to be the absolute best journalist I could possibly be. I remember one of my mentors telling me, before I even got into journalism school, I want to train you to be so good at your job that nobody can ever not hire you because of your skill set. And so being my most authentic self forced me to be so good at my job. And then when I went to journalism school, all of my professors were older white men. So they weren't, and if you're familiar with obviously going to journalism school or studying journalism, we have like really strict, ethics and like how you do things, how you tell a story, what you don't do. But one of the things that I never learned was representation and how to like really cover, how to be compassionate in your coverage. And so I formulated this question that I started asking myself, and I would teach other people. And it was just simply like, when you go into a story, ask yourself, how is the way that I'm going to cover this? And this goes for any field, by the way. So just apply it to yourself and think about it. I'd ask you to ponder on this. But how is the way that I cover this going to impact the community or the person that I am talking about? Because when you see somebody as a human and not just a subject of a story, you end up starting to realize, oh, wait, the way that I'm covering this, like, I need to make sure I'm taking care of this person because they do not owe us that story. Like, they're not doing you a favor by giving you their story. Oftentimes when you're telling, like, I spent 2 years investigating the sex trade, and so all of the stories that I was covering was traumatic, and a lot of it was very dark. And so I had to really, like, one, spend a lot of time with people before I put a camera on them or a mic for the podcast on them. And I had to remind them, like, that I wasn't going to take their story and run with it, and that we wanted to make sure that we were doing justice by them. And it was something that I had to learn because I saw how misrepresentation of my own community was constantly putting people who looked like me in danger.
For a headline.
For a headline, for clickbait, it feeds into this narrative. Like, for instance, Sinclair Broadcast has a terror alert desk on all of their local news channels. So anything terrorist related, which if we're being real here means anything Muslim related, because the mainstream media only sees terrorism in association with Muslims, right? It feeds into this fear-mongering narrative that is just very highly orchestrated and fits into like the narratives that we've created and have deeply penetrated our society. And one time on the terror alert desk, they decided to do a story on Muslim women bathing suits, but they had it on that desk. Now, tell me, like, what does that
even have to do with?
But that's the point, because to them, that's what it looks like. And so then I walk out on the beach in my hijabi bathing suit, that, by the way, is like the hardest part of wearing hijab to me, okay? And then you have people who are looking at you and then wondering, because you're in Florida, did you see that story? And like, that's the thing that's always in the back of my head everywhere I go. So, yeah.
Wow. And so I think what you were just talking about, having, taking a subject and really like getting to know them and that sort of thing, I think it could also be flipped. So when people are reading about you, they're not just seeing you as a headline or just a name, but they have to get deep into that, which sort of brings me to my next question. We all are sort of aware of a case of misrepresentation that you've recently had to deal with Vogue Magazine. They unfortunately misrepresented you by name. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your approach to dealing with it. Earlier this week, we sort of discussed cancel culture and how you could have easily just been like, Vogue is done.
Yeah.
You know, I'm over, like, we're killing it, it's done. But you didn't. Tell me why.
So it's funny enough that that happened to me, because it wasn't the first time that that's happened to me. I also told you, like, back in December, Brides Magazine did it, which is another Condé publication. And then last year, multiple media outlets used my photos to identify Noor Salman, who was the wife of the Pulse nightclub shooter, because her name was Noor as well. She doesn't wear a headscarf, but of course, when you Google someone named Noor and then my image pops up and I wear a headscarf, it fits into the same narrative that we were talking about with the Terror Alert Desk. You know, you look more Muslim, so let's make sure, just use this, right? So when the Vogue thing happened, it was not surprising to me. And the way that I can explain that it wasn't surprising to you is that, you know, 2 weeks before and the day before I saw it, we had sent over an email and we said, hey, we just want to check on the final copy, because we know that this is expected. That I've never, even when people, I mean, there are really big media outlets that I'm not going to say by name right now, but that covered the Vogue incident and still misidentified me. And so to me, I'm just like,
That's so crazy.
no, it is. Like, okay, I did a BBC interview 2 days ago. I did 2 different interviews, one for Women's Hour, and they asked me, they were like, hey, so I saw that you wanted to be the first hijabi news anchor on American television. I was like, yeah, that was something I said when I was 18 on my private Facebook, but I've already done it. I've already made all of this happen. I've done this. I've, like, produced documentaries. I've produced podcasts. I've done all of this. So, and I literally said on the radio, on the interview, this is inaccurate. And then the headline that they used was, meet the woman who wants to be the first hijabi journalist. And I was just like, I retweeted, I was like, this is false. And you guys have me on audio telling you this is inaccurate. And they're still doing it, you know? So, and I've done campaigns where people misidentify me. And then when we call and we ask them to correctly identify me, they say, no, it's already been posted. And I'm like, but screw that, it's not true. But guess what? It fits their narrative. And so all of this to go back to, we all hold implicit bias in ourselves, right? Like, nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. But when it comes to people who are at the margins of our communities, sometimes it is so deeply penetrated into our culture that everybody is, one, painted with one brush, and two, it's just like, well, I mean, we put you in this magazine or we featured you, like, you should be happy with that. Like, I've had bosses tell me that when I, like, confront them about something or I ask for something, like, you're the face of our company, or I let you do this, like, shouldn't you be happy with that?
You should just be happy to be in the room.
Yeah, and that is a very, 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 very familiar thing if you are a minority in this country. Like, you are always seen as, like, well, this, like, you should be happy. We let you in.
Like, you're here.
Like, you're the one person in the room who looks like this, but hey, you should be happy. So anyway, so the reason I didn't go about the cancel culture, whatever, is, one, I'm not a fan of it, because I recognize that people make mistakes, right? I work in media, so I know how this stuff goes. I also know that with something like that, it went through several teams, and it was a really, really big mess up. But we are also going through this whole, like, media change, right? Where, like, people are getting laid off, teams are getting cut, people are overworked. So I recognize that mistakes like that are going to be made, and they're going to keep getting made. And until we actually have conversations about what we're prioritizing, how we can create a work culture where people are comfortable enough to be like, hey, I'm not sure about this. Hey, can we talk about this? Hey, can I bring up something? Like, especially when you're a minority in the room and you've already been made to feel like you should be happy you're even here, so don't say anything.
That's actually what I was going to ask. How do we make sure something like this doesn't happen again? Or minimize the chances, I guess, of it not happening again?
So, like, just alleviate. Well, I think that we all have to, like, kind of do some self-reflection, one, and be like, what are we not familiar with? What are we familiar with? If you're talking about a community that you're not familiar with or you don't know, then, like, we need to make sure that we're comfortable enough to, like, fact check. But if we're being honest, like, people are being so overworked that fact checking today is such an afterthought, which really stinks, because we live in this culture, right? like where the president of the United States yells, fake news is the true enemy of the public, and that puts our lives on the line as journalists. But also, like, media companies people who work in media are being stretched so thin that these mistakes are also at an all-time high. So it's like, how do we remind people that, like, this fake news narrative isn't true or isn't accurate, and the way that he's portraying it, obviously, like, he's talking about people covering him, you know, but also, like, alleviate these mistakes. And so I always say, like, hire more people of color because it's something that I'm hyper aware of it. And if you're a minority, you tend to be hyper aware of it. And then if you throw me that excuse of, like, well, they just don't apply, then we can both give you a list.
I will find you a list.
Yeah, because the list exists. Many of them do. But I also think that, like, we just need to have open and honest conversations about what true inclusion looks like. So every time we use the terms diversity and inclusion, they're used interchangeably, and they're not the same thing. Diversity is like, oh, look, there are people of different colors and body types and things, like, in this campaign or in this magazine or in this whatever. It is a diverse group of people. Wonderful. Inclusion is a seat at the table. And it is actually, like, looking at the people at the top and being super honest with what that looks like. And if it doesn't look like the diversity spread that you had to check off a box, then it's not real. And it's not pushing our culture forward.
Yeah. A round of applause for that, for sure, yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people are afraid of that. That's the thing. But the reason that something like this is hopeful is because these conversations are happening, and there are people who are going to say, like, how can I be a better ally? How can I be a better listener? How can I help this problem, or how can I be of service? Which is incredible. And those, like, and we need more of those people. But I always say to, like, others who see that this is a problem, who constantly say that their hands are tied or there's nothing they can do, because every time that this has happened to me, which has been multiple times, people are very, very apologetic. And then when it comes down to actually doing something about it, it's just like, well, you know, it's not trending anymore. People are going to forget about it, you know? And so it's really hard to truly hold people accountable. And people like us remember, and I always say this, like, I recognize that tokenism today is almost a requirement to true representation and inclusion. Because if you fill like the little box of filling this diversity quota and, you know, being the, like, one Arab girl or the one black girl in the spread or whatever it is, and it's good to go, then that's who you're going to be for a certain amount of time until you get to a position that we're both in and headed towards, where you are that person who's at the table and knows who exactly to bring up. And I always say, like, the amount of conversation and anger that came from what happened with Vogue was just proof that, like, our generation is not okay with this. And people are so tired. It was like it wasn't about the fact that it was me. It was about the fact that it was everybody, because everybody realized, oh, wait, I am an afterthought. Oh, wait, I am there to fill a diversity quota. And you have to be able to, like, actually ask yourself, are you one of the people who is perpetuating this notion of just keeping people at a place where it looks like it's diverse enough or representative enough? Or do you actually believe in true inclusion? And what true inclusion looks like is having that seat at the table, but also making sure that your workspace, your organization, your campaign, or whatever it is, highlights not only diversity because of what you wear or what your skin color is, but diversity of thought, diversity in perspective and experience, because we have to be willing to be challenged. And if you're not willing to be challenged, you will get left behind. And that's...
Say it again. Whew, that was good.
That's where all of this went, because to me, I'm just like, yeah, you know, what happened with Vogue, everybody saw it and everybody got so upset because they realized, like, this is not the first time, it's not the last time. But if you really want to be on the forefront of culture, and then we have to be willing to like let people challenge us and then continue to be on the forefront of culture because we're willing to be challenged, because we're willing to hear other people's voices. And the question that I pose to everybody else who's listening, I don't know who's in this room right now, but the question that I've been pondering on is like, doesn't it make sense business-wise? Because if we're being real, all of this revolves around money and business and power and all of that. Doesn't it make sense business-wise to be a part of the people who are pushing culture forward and being on the forefront of all of this? Like, when are we going to have that honest conversation of what it actually means to, like, bring people up who have constantly been oppressed in this community? And then celebrate them and make them leaders and put them in positions of power. Because guess what? When you are at the margins of your community, the experiences that you have, the things that you've seen, the perspective that you've gained, the challenges that you've gone through are only strengths in every other place that you go into. Every newsroom,
Please, someone
every
tweet that
organization.
so I can retweet that later. That is so good.
All
so
of it.
good.
And here's a frustration, and I think I shared this with you before, is I'm so sick and tired of being put into, like, being hired for something and then being hired because it makes the company look good or it makes the organization look good or it makes whatever. It makes them look good because guess what? You have like somebody in hijab who's good at their job and it looks like we're super diverse. But then once you get in there, no matter what it is, whether it's like a brand campaign, whether it's a newsroom, whether it's an organization, whatever, when you're brought in, you are not used to your strengths and your skill sets. And part of my strength is who I am and what I've been able to learn because of this thing you're so afraid of. And from that, like, heighten it, elevate it, celebrate it, question, and like have these honest conversations. Do not try to fit me into your box of like carbon copy, cookie cutter people who have never been a part of pushing culture forward. Like, I'm here to shake shit up, and that's what I do. And if you're going to bring me into a room, then fucking celebrate it.
Thank you. I love it. I know.
That tea.
How's that for some tea, guys? Oh my God. I'm like, wow, you were just so dynamic and wonderful and powerful. I'm like clearly gushing, but let me get back on topic. So, after a situation like this, with these sorts of institutions that we want to continue to respect, but they've so often fail us, where do we go? How do we continue to respect them? How do we find that respect?
So, I mean, I think it comes down to like seeing what the response is, right? So like everybody makes mistakes. Like different people like to drag, different people like to engage in cancel culture. I'm not the biggest fan of it because, you know, one day maybe I'll make a mistake and I don't want people to do that to me. And I truly like believe in intention and everything that comes from what your intention is. And I don't think that most people are truly malicious. I think that there are people who just don't know. And sometimes you don't even know the prejudice and bias that you hold in yourself. And that takes like really deep reflection. And it takes like being able to sit with yourself and then sit with other people and be uncomfortable. And I truly believe in that uncomfort. I think a lot of growth happens in that place. But I mean, it's difficult because there is so much like power and there are people whose hands are tied, you know? So you try to figure out like what it is that you can do. But I think that starting and having these conversations, but having conversations like this in the workplace is a great place to start. Because before you do anything and just jump in and assume that like people are not familiar with what inclusion is or how to go about this or how to tell the right stories or whatever it is, you have to be like, hey, I just want to listen and like I want to be of service. Like, get the people in your company or in your space or in your organization who you know are part of a marginalized group and like just ask and be like, hey, what can I do to be of service to you? Like, what is it that you need? How can I be a better ally? How can I make you feel strong and make you do better at your job? Because if you hired me for my storytelling and my skill set, then I shouldn't have to be pulled into a room every 2 seconds when there's a story that's being done about any other minority. Because of course, if you're one minority, you know about everybody.
All of them, yeah.
And then you're like, is this okay? Is this whatever? Like, have these conversations so that people can do their jobs better. Like, nobody wants to be dragged. Nobody wants to make these mistakes. But the only way that you're gonna do anything about it is truly educating yourselves and others and creating a work culture where that is acceptable, where people feel comfortable. Like, imagine being so comfortable where you can go to your editor-in-chief, or your coworker, and be like, hey, I don't know who this person is, or, you know, is this caption appropriate, or is this whatever, you know, because that doesn't exist. And part of why that doesn't exist is because everyone is on such a crazy time schedule now. There's so few employees at different media organizations, and then everybody gets worked to the actual bone, and we all know that. And that's why I always say, you know, if you want to be a journalist, you have to really freaking love it, because you don't get paid great, and you get worked so hard. But if it's everything you know and everything you want to do, then like you have to do it. And it really is a position of service. Telling stories is such an honor. We are not owed people's stories. We are not owed anything. And being able to tell stories and give a platform to other people who haven't been able to use their voice to amplify their own truths is it has to be seen with such high respect. And I truly believe that without high quality journalism, there is no great democracy. Like, we have to be able to understand that. And that comes to fashion too. Like, we're having this conversation at Fashion Week, and I love and I appreciate that we're having this conversation here, because it starts here too. Like, we are the people behind the doors who like show what is beautiful, or what is in now, or what is okay, or what should these little girls be aspiring to look like. Because when I was a little girl, I didn't have that. I had my mom, and at the time my mom's the most beautiful human to ever walk the face of the planet, but when you're a little kid, you don't want to look like your mom, you know? And to be honest, to me, like, wearing hijab, now that I think about it, I wasn't able to do that until, like, I saw young girls, like, style it differently and wear different things and stuff. Like, I've always really had a deep love for fashion, and I always found the hijab ugly until I was able to see people do it, and that's the truth. And now you have places like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with The Modist, which is like the
Great
most
website.
incredible.
Everyone check it out.
I go, it's like the modest version of Net-a-Porter. I go on there like almost every day just for inspo, and just to be like, damn, I can be modest and freaking fabulous. And it's so amazing to see that there is something catering to me now. And it's amazing to see like people on the right, like I just walked Rebecca Minkoff, which I've never walked in my entire life.
Yes, congrats, by the way.
Oh my gosh, thank
Yay.
you. Most terrifying thing ever. This is more where I'm comfortable. But I did that, and there was like a full jumpsuit and a matching hijab that was the perfect material, perfect length, and I just kept saying thank you to her yesterday, because I was like, thank you for making this. Because when I was like, I put on the hijab exactly 10 years ago, a few days ago, February 7th, 2009. And I just remember like my dad saying, let me go, I want to buy you scarves. And we went to Aldo, because it was the only place we could find scarves. And it was February, so it was winter, so there should have been scarves. And I remember I got like a crinkly leopard print scarf that was too short, but I had to figure out how to make it work. And then this really thick zebra print one that like I couldn't hear because it was so thick. And it was just like, you know, finding that perfect scarf it's still, I mean, there are people who make them now specifically for hijab, and I'm so grateful to them. But like being able to see that representation, and then like an understanding, I think that there's a lot of bridges that still need to be built, and part of that is like, yes, it's so fabulous to see Muslim women like strut on the runway. Not enough, but we're getting there, just like with anything else. But like, let's also have these conversations about it, and not just hijab, but like anything we're uncomfortable with, unfamiliar with. I always say, and I think that a lot of people who are part of a minority group can attest to this, but like I love when people ask me questions, because I would rather you learn about me and why I dress this way and why I wear this thing on my head than some white guy on Fox News telling you why it's oppressing me, because this is the only reason that I'm sitting up here today and I feel so strong. And it's like the thing that I grew up hating because of what I saw. So like, I don't blame people for feeling a type of way towards the hijab, because as a little girl, that's all I saw too. And now it's like the strength and the confidence that comes with this is like the most humbling thing, because you realize every day you are living for something bigger than you. Oh.
Marvelous. You're so special. Oh, you're so special. And I mean, I think we just take it to the audience now. Audience questions? Not one audience question.
Sorry, guys.
I know.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
D.
I'm formulating the question as I'm asking it. So I think that we're seeing a lot of women washing in the media. So, I guess in the public. So we're seeing like a lot of brands. You have like girl power ads, on Instagram, and I think that when you dig deeper and you look, as you were speaking to, when you look a little bit, you dig a little bit deeper into these companies, you see that they don't have women on their boards. They don't have women, in their senior management. And I think that, obviously it is important for the women who work for those companies to question, but it also can be hard when you work for someone to be the one that's sort of pushing. And so I do think that, as the public, we have a responsibility to sort of nudge these companies. So how do we do that, without being a part of this sort of aggressive cancel culture, but how do we still call companies out because they care about their public image and it's the thing that they respond to. So what's the balance?
Sorry.
Oh, you go.
You can start.
I'll start. I know. I think it's all in the delivery, really. I think it is, I think you can still be hard on a company, but still be respectful of what their motives are or understanding of what their motives are. I think the worst thing to see on Twitter or on the internet or whatever in general is just people blanket canceling people with no regard for who could have come up with that campaign, why it could have gone that way. It's just like, you're done. But what do we learn from that?
That's like my point. And it's interesting because if you want to think about it, if you're talking about companies, right, and they care about their image, and then if they care enough about their image, then they would care about that actual aspect of it. And so we have to think about like who we're talking to and how we deliver those points. So if you're talking to a company that is a bunch of guys on the board, but it's like they're pushing out these women campaigns, then they should think then somebody needs to be like, hey, you don't want to be canceled or dragged, so why don't we do this? And I know that kind of stinks that it has to be that way, but I think that is one way to like directly get to the point, because you have to make it about them and be like, you don't want to be that. Because cancel culture is ruthless, and it's unforgiving, and everybody has to think about that. Like, you have to think about also that if you're scrolling through Twitter and Instagram and you, like, and this is like a frustration that I have with the journalism today, and not journalism, but like the people consuming journalism, is that we are so quick to like be so surface in our reporting or in our understanding, because there's such a quick turnaround. Social media just makes everything so fast. So there's never like a really true deep understanding of things. And even with something as simple as that, I think it's really important to have like a deep understanding. Like, I've been a lot more conscious of like who I wear, and just like, I'll look at their last campaign or their runway show and I'll be like, did I see somebody that I could relate to? And if I didn't, then I'm going to take my money somewhere that I do. And I think that comes onto the consumer, right? Like, we have to be more aware of that. We're having these constant conversations of like sustainable fashion and things like that. But to me, yes to all of that, but also to like, who do you want to give your money to that you work
we have
so
agency.
hard for?
Like, we have a choice sort of in the brands that we're able to support as well. And so, yes, you could, call them out on Twitter or Instagram or whatever it may be, but you could also just not support them financially and tell all your friends to not support them financially. And that is what will hit the company and frankly mean more to the company at the end of the day than anything else.
Just having that conversation. It's always having that conversation, but it's how you have that conversation. It's knowing who you're talking to, and then knowing what's going to make them hurt or
and what language to speak to them in.
That's
basically
what I was saying. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for taking up the mantle, because I know that, especially as a Muslima, that it could be very difficult to, I guess, live your truth or live your life versus the narrative. So thanks for that. I wanted to get your opinion or advice on someone who might feel nervous and, just living their truth if they happen to be minority, or, like if they're Muslim, like, and they're nervous about wearing the hijab. What is your best advice to combat that?
So I appreciate you and your questions. So thank you. I think whether it's hijab or anything else, like I said, like I don't think that you're ever completely ready to be your most authentic self and to like truly embrace your identity. The feeling that I always describe it as is like these shackles that kind of just fall off because you embrace yourself and what's truest to you, and then you see like who's with it, who's about it. Because once you realize like that feeling and taking that on is for you and is healing to you, because I think that like we have this notion a lot of times that you have to like be ready for things, or if it's the hijab, it's like you have to be pious enough or religious. I don't think I deserve to wear it. I don't want to wear it. Or if it's anything else, you're struggling with your identity. It's just like, I don't know if I can come out. I can do this. I can like show the world that this is who I am. Because I don't think that we're ever ready. It's just making that commitment to heal yourself. Because I do think that it is an aspect of healing, of like really understanding yourself and embracing who you are. And then being like, I'm okay with this. This is what's true to me. And I'm not living for other people. And once you realize that, like everything else just falls into place, even though it might not seem like it. Like I was told when I had this like 2-3 years where I would crazily shadow journalists and executives at news organizations, and I obsessively did it. And a lot of like the most powerful people would tell me like, you're never gonna get anywhere. You are so good at this, but the scarf, like you just have to just take it off for the news report and then put it back on after. And I was just like, do I tell you to take off who you are and then put it back on after because this little thing might offend a couple of people? Like, no. And so, but then I realized, okay, then that place doesn't deserve me. And that was my whole thing about like being in spaces that allow you to be yourself and to tap into your strength of who you are. Why would we want to be in a space that's going to try to confine us in these little boxes that have done nothing but set them back? So I truly believe that like once you realize it and you realize it is truly for you, and know that like it's not easy. It's not easy.
It's a practice, it would seem.
It is a practice, and it's also just not easy to be yourself every day. It's not easy for anybody to go outside and be themselves every day, but when you go to bed and you go to sleep and your heart knows that you are your truest, then that's all that matters. Everybody else just, bye.
Nikki, my question's for you.
Oh, wait, sorry. She has the mic.
Okay.
Hi. So I have a quick question, and this might sound all over the place, but Nikki, you just talked about whether we shouldn't support brands, but I know you guys know what's going on with Gucci right now with this situation where they're using blackface or whatever, and a lot of other brands too. So what do you do when these brands are using culture and their end users, their customers, not usually the people who can afford it, but they take elements of that culture to promote it? How do you feel about like what's going on with these brands? And I also looked on Instagram and see like the CFDA is the only brand I've seen that's like acknowledging that it's Black History Month. They've used the green, the red, and the black of like Pan-African culture and colors, and they changed their logo for the CFDA. But I noticed a lot of other brands are not doing that. A lot of fashion brands are not doing that. And then when June comes around and it's Pride Month, everybody has a rainbow logo and everybody's embracing LGBT. But it just seems like with people of color and Black culture, it's only accessible and it's only cool during February, and it's only cool. It's like now you have cancel culture, but now we have apologizing culture where you do something wrong and you don't have anybody at the seat of the table to correct those brands because there's nobody in those boardrooms that look like us. So I guess the question is, how do we combat that, especially you guys as a platform and being journalists? How can we get to those brands who are using our culture to sell? They're putting they're putting Black people and people of color into ads, wearing their clothing, and a lot of people who who in those ads can't afford it. So how do you combat that?
So, lots of things to tackle. So I obviously intimately know what's going on with Gucci right now, and I think it's really interesting that people are saying they were using blackface. I think that I'm not giving Gucci a pass at all, but I wonder if they were consciously using blackface or if they just didn't have anyone in America who looked at that turtleneck and said, that's a little tricky. That's weird, right? And so I think we're quick to be like, blackface, that's it. When we really should be saying, what does the team in America look like right now? That, as you said, the workplace culture doesn't allow them to raise their hand and say, that's weird. So what's that interaction look like? Now, should we support those brands? That's up to you. I can't tell you where you should spend your money, but what I can tell you is that you should have those conversations. And you should say, I don't know if they were using blackface, or I don't know if there was something deeper. I think we have to dig a little deeper in our conversations when we're having them. It's not, as you said, just a surface level conversation. I think we really need to ask a lot of questions before we decide exactly what's happening. Now, on the CFDA front, I love the CFDA. I congratulate them on honoring Black History Month, but every month in my life is Black History Month, okay? So you don't get a pat on the back for acknowledging me in February. I want you to acknowledge me every single day of every single month of every single year. Then we can talk, right? And so I'm happy. I believe in these brands that are doing something for February or for June, but if you're not doing it every single month, then I'm just kind of like, okay. I feel like you have a thought.
Oh, no, I was just taking that in. Oh, I felt like you said everything. I also, like, yeah, I felt like you said a lot. I mean, I think that it does take having those, I think that there's blatant, like, appropriation, you know?
Which we all know what that looks like,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, with the Gucci thing, I would have rather, like, spoken to you and gotten your thoughts on it or talked to other people about it. But I also, similar to the Vogue thing, I'll take it back to Vogue because I'm in journalism and it was something that was personal to me. I know how things work behind the scenes, and I can also recognize that, like, there's just, like, exactly, like, there's problems, like, that are deeper than just somebody completely misidentified who I was and, like, said I was somebody completely different. That's the surface problem. And I think that why it hurts so bad, though, is because the surface problems are a part of a really deeper problem, and we all know that, and we're just, like, so used to it.
Right, and everyone's just dealing with the surface problem, I think is that why, like, when I saw that happen to you, I was like, I know exactly.
But, like, I reached out, we
happened.
reached out twice, like, without a response, obviously, but we reached out the day before we ended up finding the magazine to saying, like, hey, just following up on this, because I know. I found the video of the day I was born, and my name was spelled wrong in my baby bin. I was like, this shit has been happening to me since the first day I was born. Okay, and it happens every single, this is what's sad, is, like, you're always expected to be misrepresented in a way before you're expected to be represented properly. Like, I think I was saying yesterday, like, I don't know if I've ever done an interview where everything was correct. And, I mean, that has a lot to do with our media culture and what's happening today, but also the deeper problems. So, I think, though, it's really important, especially with brands, to, like, be able to own up to things and have conversations and apologize, but then take action.
Take action.
That's for everybody. Like, take action, have those conversations, and be willing to learn. Because guess what? Like, just as much as cancel culture exists, like, people want to be forgiving, too. You're not going to take a legacy brand that we've loved for so long and be like, never again, I don't care what you do. I think it's more incredible when people apologize, they take action internally, and bring people in and say, we need to do better, we need to learn, and then they become more celebrated than before.
Like, look at what H&M is doing right now. They handled it really well, actually, and I just interviewed their head of diversity and inclusivity earlier this week, a Black Nigerian woman. H&M made a horrible mistake, okay? And they have the same sort of makeup of their office in Switzerland, somewhere, Sweden? In Sweden. So they have the same sort of situation in Sweden, and they knew they made a mistake, but they took immediate action okay? And they searched and hired a woman who will, talk to everyone, not just about how we don't make these sort of errors when it comes to advertising, but also what does your C-suite look like? Who's at the very top? What does your store look like? Is there racial profiling in stores? Are we going to teach the associates how not to do that anymore, about their implicit biases? And I think that these companies need to look at other companies and how they've made these errors and possibly bounce back from them and take a page from their book.
Hey, Nikki.
Hi.
Hi. I am curious. We heard about how Noor felt, in the Vogue sort of news breaking. How was it in the hallways of ELLE, and knowing that you work at sort of a competitive title and in a competitive organization? And I'm curious sort of what conversations that sparked internally at Hearst.
I mean, we were like, yikes, first and foremost, I must say. But then there's also a sort of like weird, that could have happened at ELLE, right? And so I think that's why I'm slightly more, I don't want to say compassionate really, like understanding of how something like that could happen. But then on the other end, it makes us even more diligent in what we do. And I work on a website, so like we are the fact-checking department, we are the editors, the copy editors, the headline writers, and so we just know that these mistakes can't happen. And if they do, people aren't that forgiving on Twitter. And so we're just really cognizant of us possibly being in that situation again, and just really making sure that hopefully we're just not, honestly. And I think it really does come from the people in the room. And so my site director, Leah Chernikoff, is a wonderful white woman who was raised in DC, and she hired a wonderfully diverse staff. So I oversee the fashion and beauty team that is made up of 2 Filipino women and 1 half black, half white girl. And that is what my team looks like alone, fashion and beauty. That is unheard of, honestly. But Leah has made it a point to hire in a diverse way so situations like this don't happen. And I only hope that other brands will do the same.
The last question.
Yeah. Oh. And then there's one over there, maybe.
Good morning. I want to say thank you. I believe I speak for everyone for thank you for having this conversation. With cancel culture, we are so focused on the negative. And not really understanding. Like I am from Brooklyn. I've raised Catholic with Muslims in my family, living in Crown Heights in the middle of Hasidic Jewish neighbors. So I see it all. But when it comes to cancel culture, we're always trying to, I guess, minimize and get rid of people and get rid of organizations. In your opinions, what brands and what outlets are actually doing it right? Who are the ones that are being inclusive and who are having the conversation and just being on the forefront of the change?
I think if you look at a lot of these direct-to-consumer brands that are young or that are run by young women, so something like an Outdoor Voices is doing really well in terms of inclusivity in their ad campaigns. Third Love, which sort of is in this weird beef with Victoria's Secret right now, which I think we all know about. But I think Third Love, just in terms of their size diversity in their clothing, is really amazing. And Aerie is really doing the work, and they are even pushing themselves a little further. They had a situation recently where Jamila Jamil is a part of their ad campaign, and she said that it was for all bodies, and then she was like, you know what, it's not, I misspoke. And the brand is working to push it even further because they didn't have anyone who was plus size in their campaign. And so I think in that specific case study, even Jamila Jamil saying this is for everyone, and then her saying, you know what, I was wrong, and leaving up her old tweet that she put out there, responding to herself and saying, actually, that's not true. But I do know that the company acknowledges it and is going to remedy that fact in the future, is what this new sort of, that's where I think like cancel culture or whatever should go towards. I think this is the last question.
I just want to address like about your Vogue thing. I saw the IG video, and the moment I saw your reaction and what happened, to me, I was like, bullshit. This is malicious compliance. This is another way for them to kind of keep you in your place, you know, and it's like, kudos to you for having the decorum that you did, because with me, we all know another side of media, which is media manipulation, and it's if we could cause an anger or, you know, a little more tea, then everyone would be more interested, be more like impacted by it, you know. And I feel like, honestly, like, it's happened to you so much. Bullshit. This is nobody who works in media and should have a job in media or publishing and loves it would ever make that mistake. I feel like it is like an unspoken little like thing that they do on purpose to keep you, you know, like marginalized, to keep you as a little symbol, but at the same time, like, I don't know, like just passively keep their audience kind of like on their.
I can say I don't think Vogue would want that.
So-
I don't think they'd play that
maybe
game.
not
But
all.
I
yeah.
want to say that I hear you though. Like I hear you and I feel your sentiment and I know, and that's part of why when I said what I said, I was like, I try to fight this every day, but sometimes I just feel defeated because I think that your sentiment is just a testament to how we feel, because when it happens to you so much, it just feels like it has to be like malicious.
That
It
has
just
to be the
has
case.
that.
It couldn't be anything. Yeah.
I just because of I know what it's like to be in a newsroom. I wouldn't have made an assumption about anything. I knew immediately. I'm sure it was a mistake, but it was a mistake that that was expected. And the way that I made sure I waited until I heard exactly. I wanted to know every detail of how it happened. And when I did, I was like, that's a mess up. That's not okay. That's not okay. That's not okay. That's not okay. None of it malicious, but all very, very careless. But part of, yeah. And so no excuses because it wasn't okay. But I also recognize that like we have so much work to do. And this is just an example of having so much work to do. So yes, it happened. That video, by the way, was never supposed to be posted. It was like a personal video that I wanted my husband to take, like so I could send it to my family. And then I got on the plane because I thought it was just my name. And then I realized, oh no, they called me an actress and a director. And it was a different person. And then I sat and I like was bawling my eyes out, couldn't even see. And I looked at him and I was like, did you end up getting that on camera? And I didn't mean it in a way where I wanted to post it. I meant it, and I really hate that we have that. Like, I did not want that to exist. And then I was just trying to figure out what to do, and I think the impulse in me was just like, I feel like people need to know that, like, I'm tired, and that's really what it is. And so I don't think that there might be places where things are malicious, but nobody ever wants to make a mess up that big, especially in this world. Nobody wants to be canceled, and they've gone through a lot of it. I mean, a week later, 2 actors from Crazy Rich Asians were misidentified, and we knew that it was going to happen again. We were told it was going to happen again because of how things happen on the inside. So you know that, like, nobody wants to be that person. I totally hear you.
I know. I'm like, I feel you. I
That's
feel
the thing
you
is,
guys.
like, I know
that's
exactly.
It. Yeah.
Such like good, you know, like I wouldn't have, like when your voice broke in that video, it was like a soft, sad voice. I would have been like,
You know what that softness was, though? That softness was
soft anger.
not again.
Yeah.
Again. So it's like this frustration, but again, to go back to like, we just have to do better in our newsrooms, and also like we are so understaffed, overworked, and on top of that, the people who are in the newsroom carry these implicit bias and inside of them, and so that is the deeper problem that we have to constantly address and have. And you're right, we should call people out, and we should expect them to give better answers to us, and we should expect them to answer to these things, and we should expect them to say that they want to do better and then follow through with it and be very vocal about how they follow through with it, because we are all remembering. So just don't forget.
Exactly. So I think we got to wrap up here. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for speaking
Thank
with
you.
us. Thank you, IMG. This has been, sorry?
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Huge fan. But serious question. If these companies keep doing this, I'm a fan too. I can't ask a question.
You can ask me
If
when you
these
get home.
companies keep doing this and their response is, hey, why don't you come and help us and make you do more work? At what point do you not try and jump onto a drowning ship and actually support the people who are making these moves instead of crawling up to the one or two people at the very top who are waiting for your arrival to then put you to work for their magazine at a rate that is significantly lower because you should be happy to be in the room, versus going to another publication, starting your publication, or finding one of the hundreds that have been doing this and haven't been successful. I don't know. We can talk about it later at home.
can
if you
talk
want.
about it
Totally talk. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, so, okay, Adam is sharing my frustration because he has seen every single second of every single thing that's happened in the last month, and he knows exactly what's going on, and I think that he's absolutely, we have this conversation at least once a day, and so, yeah, you're absolutely right in that, I think, and this is where the reflecting point comes into, because sometimes you feel defeated, and sometimes you're like, wait, are you trying to just be apologetic so that we can sweep this under the rug and then next time it's going to happen again? What should I really do? And I made a decision. I have always said, like, I go to different companies and newsrooms and I do like true talks on diversity and what inclusion looks like and how we can do better. And I've offered it to every publication, including theirs, to do. Because I truly care about us doing better. But you're absolutely right, and that is what I've been thinking about a lot lately, is attaching yourself to teams and people who actually care about it. And there are people who care, and there are people who want to be allies and do better. And like I said, and we can end on this point because I know we have to run, but this is going to happen whether people want to be a part of it or not. But I hope that these bigger brands and publications choose to be a part of it.